Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge senior writer Ryan Harlan. We're coming to you guys ahead of Oregon State's matchup with Appalachian State on Saturday. The Mountaineers, Oregon State traveling across the country to face the Mountaineers up in Boone, North Carolina. We'll get all the way into that matchup. Unfortunately, the Beavers will be searching for their first win of the season, as it was not to be following Houston. And if you guys have read our post-game breakdown, watched our videos and all that, we've already pretty much ran through the toughness that was Houston, and it was a doozy. And we'll see how Oregon State ultimately responds, but we'll get into that much more here on the Edge podcast. But want to go ahead and welcome on Ryan Harlan. Ryan, well, just like we expected before the season, here we are 0-5. Like, it's almost crazy to think that it's been, this bad of a start to the season, but we'll get into it a little bit later. And for a couple weeks, the old saying's going to ring true. There's not an opponent on the schedule as tough as the last few, and it just keeps going down to in respect as far as opportunities for wins in the back half. So still an opportunity for Oregon State to somewhat try to stop the bleeding, as Ryan and I have said many times, but ultimately would have to start with a road win in hostile territory. Ryan, you kind of have said before it's not going to be an easy task, but you've talked to the team this week. The biggest thing I see with this group, you've heard the stories of, it's happened before where a team has started 6-0 in college football and finished 6-6, or dare I say, started 1-5 and finished 6-6. It wouldn't be unheard of for something like that to happen, especially with this schedule for Oregon State. But the only way it can is if this team's not cracking apart at the seams. What are your impressions of where this team is at mentally, being 0-5 right now from your conversations with the guys this week?
I mean, I would say this kind of first off, the mentality is, especially from, I would say it starts with the coaches, but like talking to Coach Chance today, it's like it's really a reinforcing to guys of trusting the technique, trusting schematics, trusting what they're doing out on the field, even in spite of the 0-5 record that they currently hold right now. It's continuing to do those little things, continuing to show up, work day in, day out. Now you kind of have to take the coaches, at their word for it, because we're not there. We're not there anymore in seeing it live in person. So to me, like, that's kind of, I think, the messaging a little bit, because you see it a little bit. You see kind of the flashes kind of here and there of what this team can be when they try to put it all together, but it's now, kind of a matter of doing it through 4 quarters. Houston was the closest that we've at least seen them to trying to put together a complete performance through 3.5 quarters, if you call it that, rather than four. But that's like the closest that we have seen so far. So there is a bit of that. And then I would say from the players that we have talked to throughout the week, it's, hey, we're on to next week. Like, we need to get a win. Like, we need oxygen. Like, that's really
Right.
kind of the mentality. I think they're kind of itching for that. They're like, yeah, it sucks, but if we do our 1/11th of each of our jobs out on the field, then we should be able to put it all together and win a game. Like, that is, I would say, the mentality from both sides of the spectrum there, from coaches and players.
It's true. And, for what it's worth, Ryan, it's, you kind of have to go back and look and realize, like, Oregon State, they've had a couple, the games that they could have won, namely Fresno State and Houston. I'm not quite in the same boat that one special teams play, the 12 men on the field against Cal would have, like, sure, it would have changed the game, but I don't think Oregon State was prepared in that game, and I think we've kind of seen that now with hindsight. So when you kind of look at it that way, it's like they've lost who they were expected to lose to, Tech, Oregon. As much as Oregon State wanted to see it go the other way, they were still a 13-point dog or 12-point dog in Houston, or playing Houston. And Fresno State, yeah, you were a favorite and you lost. And I think, as I recall, Cal was real close, if not a slight Oregon State spread. But, you go back, and I just wonder how much different this conversation, Ryan, would be if this team was at least 1-4 and didn't have, like, Fresno State given away. I almost and I think that's a fair question to you, Ryan. Which one hurts more, Fresno State or Houston? Because I think equally they have some. I've kind of gone back and forth with this myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first off, it'd be a different conversation if this team were 1-4 or
Yeah,
even, 2-3 right now. Like we'd be having a different talk about this team depending on their record and if they won those two games that they did. I'd honestly say it's Houston. Fresno State it was bad,
yeah,
right? But the sticking point I have for that game is you should have adjusted on the fly in the moment and not tried to have kicked another field goal in that game, punted, anything like that, or had Malik Murphy pooch punt in that game. You should have done that stuff in game in the moment when you knew long snapping was becoming a problem. But the Houston game was probably the more heartbreaking out of the bunch because from where I was watching it, like that's the first time this team showed signs of life, showed everything coming
right,
together, a two-score lead to start out the game, and then right as you get into the fourth quarter there, you have that obviously that field goal block to begin with, but right as you get in that fourth quarter, becomes a one-score game, and you're like, God help us, it's gonna get ugly, and it got ugly fast. And in that manner, where you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in a game that you were in control of, Bray even said it post game, you were in control of for 3.5 quarters, and you
right,
didn't finish. That's the more heartbreaking one out of the bunch because you were in the driver's seat. Like despite being a dog to Houston at home to open up that game, like you easily could have won that game. And the
right,
fact that you can sit there now and look back on it and point to special teams being an issue and then the offense stalling out because they couldn't finish drives. Like the defense
right.
did what they could, and I'll give credit where credit's due on that, but I'm not even wanting to put that as a moral victory there. But like when the offense is only out there for 3 plays and the defense just got off the field, like those guys were exhausted probably at
Right.
the end. Like they just didn't have enough gas left in the tank to finish.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think Houston is tougher, but at the same token, I think a lot of Beaver fans were kind of expecting potentially another curb stomping, especially
Yeah.
after the two that we saw, Texas Tech and Oregon. But, call me crazy, Ryan, and you kind of did going into the week where I was like, I think Oregon State can hang with and beat this Houston team. And I felt a little nutty for my projection, but I just had a feeling that this team was just going to be like, okay, we've got our tails kicked for 4 straight weeks in different ways, but regardless, like the buck stops. And to an extent, it kind of did. Like you saw that inspired defensive performance, even though it didn't like necessarily show in like the advanced kind of metrics. I still think it was better than what we had seen. But at the same token, Ryan, regardless of the offense's ineffectiveness, the defense broke in the fourth quarter and allowed, the 50-yard over the middle catch to Koziol, the tight end, where you're like, how can you allow that? Or the wide open wheel route for the first touchdown. And it suddenly just became way too easy on defense. And to your point, those guys were out there. They were probably gassed, but you've like Skylar Thomas told us post game, we played great for 3 quarters. We got to play for 4 quarters on defense, and Houston was still 3-0 for a reason. They still had some playmakers, and they just weren't able to take a lid or keep the lid on it. And I think something Trent Bray talked about too. Guys let off. I think when Oregon State went up by 2 touchdowns with 12 and some change in the fourth quarter, I think a lot of guys thought it was over and thought, hey, this game's wrapped. Houston, we've held them, especially after what they limited to yardage wise in those quarters in between. I think it was something like 7 or 8 yards in the third quarter, Ryan, and you're just like, okay, yeah, it's only natural that a few players probably would have let it slide, and credit to Houston for being able to capitalize. And then Oregon State's just horrible execution in overtime offensively. The whole Murphy can't take a snap, but then can come back in the next play. All that we kind of have gone through. The lack of being able to block on kicks and overarching, Ryan. Let's just transition this to the next point I wanted to make, which is no staff changes. I thought almost certainly after the picture went viral on social media of how poorly blocked Oregon State's what would have been game-winning attempt in regulation was, and you're just like, wow, let's circle the amount of people who could block this. And I actually got to give credit to former colleague at Oregon State, Brian Rathbone, for jumping in Ryan's, I believe it was Ryan's picture that he posted and made a comment like, I had to confirm myself, but he couldn't even confirm Oregon State had 11 players on the field in on that play. I believe they did upon looking at it, but it was just like the comedy of errors, Ryan, that has become special teams this season. And again, like I said in my story on Saturday, the time for being nice has passed. I'm just going to be brutally honest with you, Ryan. If any one of us or any one of y'all at home were that bad at your job, week over week over week, you would be let go. And I'm not
Yeah.
trying to be, I mean, Ryan, whether you're, the guy who works, for the cable company, the internet guy, if it's like, hey, you went to do setups 5 weeks in a row and they're bad setups. And you're like, well, I'll get it next time. I mean, it's one of those things where I think the burden of proof is very different from like what we think of as everyday people, but Ryan, you've worked in sports. I've worked in this. I've also worked in radio, and I'm like, even for those who are listening who are maybe in sales, Ryan, something very relatable to a lot of people. The old saying, if you just don't sell or you're not doing good, you probably won't keep your job for very long. So it's one of those things where Oregon State's results speak for themselves, Ryan. They are the worst pro football focused graded special teams unit in America. Now, I know a lot of people maybe scoff and go, look the other way to Pro Football Focus. I think they're very accurate here and spot on. I think it's indicative of a team that's been the worst in the country. Ryan, the floor is yours. I'm just curious from Monday, why hasn't Trent Bray wanted to move on from Jamie Christian at this point?
Yeah, when I heard that, I couldn't believe it when I heard him say the quote, if it would benefit the players to do that, I would absolutely do it. At this moment, that isn't the case. So when talking about staffing changes, delegating different responsibilities, taking, play calling, things like that, moving that to say like a Danny Langsdorf or even to reassigning Jamie Christian's responsibilities to somebody else. He said no, which I'm like, you pointed out the fact that they're the worst special teams unit in the country. Like the fact that you had to even say that of like, oh yeah, this is not in the best interest of the players. So then what is? That's the thing I have the problem with. Like, when is it time? Like, if this were any other program across the country, that Jamie Christian would be gone by week two. He'd be gone. He'd be out on the street with no job right now.
Gosh, if he
That
worked
is
for Mike
plain.
Leach, he would have been gone weeks ago. I mean,
Exactly. Exactly. That is just simply inexcusable. And on top of that, too, Brendan, like he also went out and made it worse by giving a vote of confidence to Jamie
right.
Christian because when those PFF grades updated, it was right right after he had said, "I believe Coach Jamie Christian can do this job and finish the year for sure." Which, if you ask
Mm,
any Oregon State fan, if you ask me, if you ask yourself about that, we don't have that kind of confidence right now in this group because this special teams unit is currently on their fifth kicker this season. We're not even halfway through the year. They're on their fifth kicker, who they added week one before Cal.
yeah, like no
That is
camp, no camp.
no camp, no nothing. And they're on their third long snapper, who is a converted outside linebacker who just
Shout out
started to
Will
snap
Haverland, man.
in.
He's gotten better though.
Yep.
I gotta give him some props though. He has
Who's
gotten better, man.
I will
He
give him props
has.
too, yeah. But
He
like he
has.
started snapping in week two, leading up
Yep.
to week two against Fresno. Like no other
No.
special teams unit has dealt with that in the manner in which this is unfolded for Oregon State.
Right.
Like any other school, Jamie Christian would be gone. And like you don't even need to say that from like Jamie Christian's current grades right now for this group. Like UNM, if you go to 2023 when he was
Right.
coaching running backs and special teams, those stats speak for themselves. They were at the bottom of FBS rankings for
Right.
special teams. Like you're not going into a situation on Saturday where you have a ton of confidence in this group if it comes down to it to have them win you this game against Appalachian State because they'll
Yeah.
find some other way to make it inexcruciatingly painful to
You know,
watch.
right. I mean, I almost compare it, Ryan, to, and, I do like to include the COVID year because I think it's worthwhile. It took Jonathan Smith until year 4 to fire Tim Tibesar. When we all knew the defense, I know it predates your time slightly, but the defense was, 2018, you're like, okay, 2019, you're like,
It
should
was
have
still bad.
should have
Yeah.
seen some improvement there, but okay. Then COVID kind of just gave him a free pass, and then obviously, as we know, Trent Bray was, handed the keys in 2021 after some bad performances. I Other than that, I can't think back to a time when a fan base has been so vocal about wanting to make a change too. And I understand to an extent on the other side of the coin, Trent Bray, like a fan base doesn't run my program. And I understand that and I respect
Yeah.
that. I do. But the results and yeah, again, I'm a numbers guy. I'm a numbers and a vibes guy. And again, I'm a big fan of what, you know, PFF metrics ultimately show in the long run. Can they be nitpicked? Absolutely. But when we're sitting here talking about how, wow, Oregon State's, special teams are bad, and we'll just let y'all in on a little secret too, it's entirely possible that some FCS teams have better special teams grades than Oregon State too. Maybe we'll get into that at some point down the line if we really want to take a look at it. But bottom line, it's just I'm shocked. Other staff changes, I'm not as shocked. I'm shocked that special teams continues to be, but nevertheless, I guess we can't
Yeah.
harp on it. Have
The
to just
reason
move.
why I'm
Or,
shocked, Brendan, is because special teams has lost you 2 games.
right,
Like
if not
this
three.
is if not three, yeah. You were in a different spot if you had a competent snapping operation
Right,
and you don't have those 2 blocked field goals against Houston and your kicker doesn't get hurt and you have to trot out your backup kicker who had never kicked at all, who
right.
you got to come to you before the season even started, or right as the season started.
And then
So
all
like
ex yeah,
that is like
yeah,
that is why I can't believe it that nothing has changed on that. And I understand Trent Bray has said like the outside noise doesn't move him, but I'm like, hey, when is enough for you?
right,
Like if special teams costs you another game going forward, or even 2 more, what's your threshold? Because
right.
clearly it seems to be that with how things are currently going right now, Bray doesn't want to make that move. Barnes definitely doesn't want to make that move either, and having those conversations. So yeah, that's why I found it just mind-boggling when I heard that, and even the vote of confidence too, because
Right.
it's like Trent, are you watching the same games that we are? You called your special teams unit an effing joke
Right. Weeks ago.
live on air
Weeks ago. I mean,
weeks ago. Yeah, like so what's the disconnect there? And like does Trent Bray remember that he got the defensive coordinator job because somebody was let go?
yeah. I mean, it's it's a very valid point, and I think it does underscore maybe his ability to be able to, fire a coach. And I think that's hard, and it would be the first coach he would, have to fire, considering that, we know that Keith Hayward left under mutual, things last season. Kyle Devan left for another opportunity. But I'll just say this too, Ryan, to add on last point on that. It's not like Oregon State's kick coverage has been good either, as it seems
No.
like opponents
No.
get out to the 35 all the time. And then I'll add on, they don't routinely know when to fair catch. So I'm like, that's just two more special teams things. Like I said, I think we've harped on that, but I think it's a fair point, and I think the criticism out there is valid. And the only way to stop it would be massively improved results, which I I question about thinking. And before we get into App State, I want to take a moment too in the podcast, just before we get any deeper, to talk a little bit about the news that broke yesterday, and that was Oregon State's NIL deal with Blueprint. A really kind of deep layered situation. We're still kind of information gathering. Make sure to stay locked to BeaversEdge.com, Ryan Harlan on Twitter, and obviously us on the damn board, as we'll have an updated story coming in later with what we know. But I want to kick it over to Ryan right now just to kind of give you guys the bare bones version of kind of what we're hearing right now, and how, if you haven't seen it yet on social media, just how really alarming of a situation this kind of is as far as the NIL situation. So, floor is yours, Ryan.
So there was an article for those that don't know from Daniel Levitt, who works for Sportico, and they were the ones that reported on the Trailblazers sale. But Levitt posted an article about Oregon State's deal with Blueprint, looking at the figures exactly that were associated with the contract terms and everything. He also published several pages of that deal as well onto his Twitter too. So that's something there where if you haven't, go take a look at it. But essentially, the way that I explain this to Brendan, and for those that don't quite understand, is say Oregon State makes about 3 million per year in NIL, right? Well, Blueprint takes about 50 to 75%, give or take. So when I say that approximate range, that's varies school by school. So Maryland would have maybe similar figures going on there because they're also a Blueprint school, but we don't know exactly what those look like quite yet. But for Oregon State, though, let's call it about half a grand, a quarter of a grand to 250K, almost
Okay.
300K for operating costs for NIL. That's used to pay in-house people that are Blueprint employees that will run the collective, basically. So you're
Okay.
paying
Yeah.
300 right off the bat. Those are going to be running those salaries, almost like kind of a Learfield to a
Okay.
degree. But there's also a target fundraising goal of 750K per year that increases by 3% each time. So
Okay.
that
Yeah.
is like basically chump change to SEC and Big Ten schools because the like if you were to field a roster, some of that would be going to like the lowest priority
Right.
position
Sure.
there. So that increases over time there. But like, and then on top of those things that are getting paid from the university to Blueprint is a 1.25% contract fee handling by
Okay.
Blueprint for any NIL deals. So any NIL deals in this case. So this goes for anything that would be involved under the umbrella of name, image, and likeness. So from TV rights deals to social media stuff to negotiating athlete deals, that all goes to Blueprint. So combined together out of that hypothetical 3 million, they're getting about over 1.5 million, almost half of that. So half to almost 75% is not go of that NIL is not going in the pockets of student athletes.
Well, in
That is
my
basically
yeah.
what's like that distribution is. So that's the agreed upon terms that were in that article that were in those pages that Levitt published.
And just a quick follow up, Ryan, your thoughts on this as well. Just for Beaver fans who are curious, while that deal on the surface definitely seems bad, it's not as though Blueprint is going to suddenly be able to find Oregon State so much money in the NIL realm to say they're like, hey, we got 30 million in NIL now, so we take 15. Even still, that'd be significant for Oregon State, but I don't think it's necessarily going to lead to more NIL dollars to begin with.
No, so that's basically the issue,
Mm.
right? Like with how much they're taking, the pool that you have to build a roster
It's
and to
weak.
get guys like a Malik Murphy, for example, that you paid 1.5 million to, you won't have that capability to do it. But at this point in time, that would also not only impact football, that would impact every single other sport going on down the line in the future. Because all those sports at Oregon State are also using NIL too to, maintain competitive rosters. And yes, I know for certain programs, there are certain, ways that you can donate NIL. There are donors for, obviously the baseball program and other ways of, getting in that cash to build out a roster. But like Oregon State baseball, Brendan, like their NIL can't compete with, an LSU.
LSU,
Like
yeah.
so that even then, like they're in a cash strapped situation too in terms of NIL, but credit where credit's due with what Mitch Canham's been able to do with his squads, year in and year out. So you credit coaching in that regard. Same thing with Scott Ruick too for women's basketball. Similar deal as well. But that's basically kind of the rundown of it. And where I think a lot of people have, their frustrations aimed at is the athletic department is heavily involved in this. Brent Blaylock, the chief operating officer, who is right under Scott Barnes, from what I know and what I've been told, was he was the man responsible for Arizona being under blueprint, and Arizona's athletic department's in a fair amount of debt as a result. But
Hmm.
basically, from what I was told, there was almost a point in time where Blueprint was going to get let go because there was with Jed Fish, a lot of issues around paying players. There's also issues around paying players like Matthew Solko when he was at UNLV. There's also a
Sure.
connection with Blueprint and the state of Nevada as well that I published onto our thread talking about this for a little
Yep.
more
Check it
deep
out.
dive
Absolutely. Yeah.
into that. But like essentially this is bad all the way around. Like especially if you're a fan and you want to donate to this university, like
Right.
you don't know where that money's going, basically how much of that's getting actually to the players, because it more than not sounds like it is going directly into the pockets of Blueprint, and there's nothing that's benefiting the university out of this deal. Because I'm sure probably with how Barnes negotiated that Civil War deal to have the series start back up in Autzen in 2027, I'm sure Blueprint came out of that deal and they're like, I can't believe they agreed to this. That's probably the reaction that they had of just like they said yes to this.
Yeah, multi levels of bad. Again, if you're a Beaver fan, it's not the most optimistic thing. I think I saw that recently the Beavers got a court win against the Mountain West as far as an ongoing I think lawsuit continuing between the two conferences. I'm like, huh, finally a win because there haven't been too many recently, and this feels like a pretty big loss too. I do want to make note and say. Obviously make sure to stay locked into us. We're still kind of in an information gathering. Ryan mentioned that the images that have leaked are only a part of the kind of contract. So we're all still trying to figure out more and learn more as we go. But kind of the big headline here is there is some issues with Oregon State's NIL future. And things that, I think Scott Barnes and company are definitely going to have to be held somewhat accountable for. So we'll kind of continue to keep you guys updated. Ryan, just kind of the final word on that before we spend the last few minutes kind of previewing App State.
Yeah, like for me, like the biggest thing is the fact that you have to do this and bring this in-house when you're sitting on a supposed war chest that you got from the lawsuit as well, that you can't use that to help you out in terms of NIL and
It's
anything like
true.
that that you can do with damnation itself before you made that move for Blueprint to acquire it is also head scratching, because at this point it's like, so what's that money for then if you're just going to sit around with it and not do anything, right? So maybe it's the TV deal, we don't know, could be anything at this point, but like that's also just as egregious as kind
Yeah.
of everything else going on with this whole deal. And this is the business model that Blueprint follows. So it's, as I was told about Blaylock's time in Arizona, like this doesn't shock that from what I was told, doesn't shock this person that told me that. So
It's disappointing, and we'll definitely keep tabs on it. Make sure to stay locked into Beaver's Edge, as I mentioned, for continuing coverage. Again, it's one where the hole is deep. We're gonna have to dig deep and see what we find because it's fascinating and it seems like there's many layers to it. But just to wrap up with our final few minutes, let's go ahead and move over to this weekend's game. Appalachian State, 12:30 p.m. for us here on the West Coast. The Beavers will be playing App State on ESPN Plus again. Most people will have to either have ESPN package or sign up for that, including yours truly, so you can check out the ESPN Plus packages to watch the Beavs, or of course, catch them on the radio and stay locked in with us at BeaversEdge.com. Fortunately, Ryan and I will not be making the trip out to Boone, North Carolina. It's quite far to get to, and it takes an adventure. And I'll say this: we'll be providing you guys great content from afar, including Brogan Slaughter as well, but. Ryan, kind of diving into this real quick, we'll be getting deeper into App State. I would highly encourage everybody to head over to BeaversEdge.com right now. We've got a story I just put up, 5 questions with Appalachian State expert. I caught up with one of the hosts of Appalachian State's Black and Gold podcast, learned a lot about App State. Would highly encourage everyone to check out that story in addition to our closer look at the Mountaineers story as well. Just kind of getting you guys ready for App State and early takeaways that I have, Ryan. Their wins, so they're 2-2 on the year. Wins over Charlotte and Lindenwood, and then losses to Southern Miss and Boise State. Boise State last week, it was a blowout. Just, every week is different, every game's different, matchups are everything in college football, but I'm not sold on this App State team the same way I wasn't sold on Houston for their lack of competition last week. And it showed, like, Lindenwood and Charlotte, I'm sorry, like, Oregon State still got better rosters than those teams, period. And you look like, I would think, even this year, we know Boise State's kind of down. They got smacked to open the year a little bit, and Boise State smacked them. Granted, it was at home versus on the road, which I think makes a big difference. But I like how Oregon State matches up in this one, Ryan. I think the opportunity will be there for a win. Will they be able to execute and actually do it? Well, that's the question. But I think an opportunity will be there.
Yeah, I would say yeah. You got to play the game first before anything else, any given Saturday. But that's my issue. That's why I'm like really apprehensive on taking Oregon State on
Sure, yeah.
Saturday. Like that's mainly it because also too, Brendan, like we talked about the track, like you're 3,000 miles, 5 almost 6 hour flight. The it's not for the weak. Like I've done it before, having grown up in Virginia and was living in Virginia during undergrad before I started living here full time in Oregon. Like it's a tough trip, and then
Right.
time zone change too. Getting there into Boone is not easy. Closest airport is in North Carolina. I think it's in Asheville, maybe, or even Charlotte,
Yeah,
depending
I
on where
thought
they
I heard
fly into.
Charlotte. Yeah, yeah.
So that's really just more dependent on where they, travel into, where they have to stay as well. So it's a long trek and a tough ask for any West Coast team, especially Oregon State, to even with their struggles to, kind of pull together a win on the road in that kind of environment. And also like with the Beavers, it's like it's also a tough ask for them too to like get their first win of the year in that kind of condition and environment. Uh, yeah, it's a tough one because like I personally don't see them pulling it all together at that point, but it's more of a like just it's not like I lose all faith in that. It's just it's a tough ask. It's a tough draw to really ask this team to pull it together here, but there is always the chance that they somehow can pull it out of the hat and get their first win of the year. So at least you feel somewhat more confident in this group, kind of getting into the back half of their schedule. But yeah,
Right.
I kind of at least for myself in terms of predictions, like I'm steering clear far away from Oregon State this weekend.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ryan. First of all, quit being so dramatic. It's only 2,236 air miles and only 2,667 road miles. Relax, bro. It's not three. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I did learn from last night's conversation with the Black and Gold podcast. It's the furthest an opponent will have ever traveled to play App State in Boone. The longest previous to this was when Eastern Washington went out to play them in 2007, Idaho a couple times as well. But the travel will be interesting. But, it's like anything else, Ryan. I think if this team hasn't cracked like we talked about earlier, I think there's still a chance. Obviously, I'm curious now after Ryan's teased it. Our predictions might be a little bit different this week, but that's why you guys got to read them each week, right? To be able to see exactly how much variation there is between us as a staff. Last week we were split 50-50, and it turned out to be a pretty darn good one. So make sure to stay locked into BeaversEdge.com for all the latest. Make sure to stay tabs on Ryan and myself as we'll continue to have coverage of Oregon State as far as the NIL situation is going with Blueprint. And obviously, we'll have the injury report coming up, our staff predictions. Ryan and I will be getting you guys ready with our social media game day coverage for Oregon State. It'll be an early kickoff again, 12:30 for us here on the West Coast. And we'll see ultimately if Oregon State and Trent Bray's squad is able to get another win. But big thanks to Ryan Harlan for joining us on this edition of the Edge podcast. As mentioned, Ryan will be doing some deep dives into that NIL situation, taking a closer look at the Blueprint situation and trying to make sense of it. And we'll have an article up at BeaversEdge.com to come, so stay tuned for that as well. And again, make sure to check out all of our rest of our content at BeaversEdge.com from the whole staff as we get you guys ready for Oregon State, App State on Saturday. This has been the Edge podcast, getting you guys ready for Oregon State's matchup. We'll see if they're able to get their first win of the season on the road. Thanks for watching.